Assassin's Creed Valhalla is my personal favorite of this new revamped trilogy of games in the franchise, but the reasons I enjoy it I feel might be turnoffs for others. The improved combat and raiding with a platoon is the focus of the game, which is executed very well, but ultimately casts aside the stealth roots of the franchise. To me, this is a step in a direction that the series needs to take to break loose of what defined these games nearly a decade ago in order to become the standard bearer for action RPGs. I also would like to get this out of the way. If you are planning on picking this game up on PC at launch, don't. Not to say the console version can't be buggy at times, but the PC version was nigh unplayable for me, a problem I also had with Watch Dogs Legion, and I gave up trying to work through it, crashing constantly after an hour in. Many Assassin's Creed games revolve around family, betrayal, and political strife in the setup for their campaigns, and Valhalla is no different. Set in the 9th century, Eivor, who could be played as male or female the entire time, or if you so choose, either sex at different points in the story, is seeking revenge for the death of their parents at the hands of a rival clan leader. In order to get what they desire, they make specific choices that ultimately lead them to leave Norway with their brother Sigurd to form a new home in Anglo-Saxon England. From there, the main thrust of the game is for this small group of Danes to extend their reach through devastating raids or diplomatic alliances, expanding their base camp of Ravensthorpe from a ramshackle village to a thriving community. The game's familial core of Eivor and their brother Sigurd at times is strikingly similar to the Cassandra and Alexios dynamic in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. As time goes on, and the story gets a little more breathing room as the Raven clan expands through England, Valhalla makes some interesting deviations that set it apart from the more recent entries in the series, but I truly hope that the next game in the franchise breaks from this setup entirely. The narrative that ties directly into the gameplay of Raven Clan's expansion across England is the story that I found more compelling, but at times can be off balance. Eivor and their people are not refugees that have no other choice to flee Norway. They explicitly decide to leave in order to reap the rewards of literal greener pastures. While they initially arrive with the goal of being as peaceful as possible, they very quickly move to the raiding and pillaging part. The game then creates villains that are so spiteful and power-hungry that you have no choice but to root for Eivor. Valhalla at times tries to raise a both sides argument, but it never really works as well as intended. I very quickly ended up taking things at more face value and ultimately enjoyed the narrative for what it was. However, it was never lost on me that Ubisoft itself is currently a company going through its own internal issues regarding abuse of power, so I never really gave up on scrutinizing the game's narrative. There's a phrase people like to use when critiquing video games: gameplay is king. It's something I've never fully subscribed to, but it's hard to argue that in the case of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, it isn't true. Something that ultimately pushed me away from Origins and Odyssey is I felt that the rebuilt combat system was only part of the way there. The 2-year gap in titles has allowed the development team to refine it, and I'm so thrilled with the results. Eivor and their clan are a devastating and relentless force, something the gameplay completely captures. Every swing of my axe felt snappy and satisfying, and even after hours of playing, exclamations of disbelief at Eivor's ruthlessness continued to spew from my mouth. More often than not, Eivor is accompanied by a squad of Viking warriors to aid them in expanding Ravensthorpe's reach, and it works better than any system prior Assassin's Creed games have implemented. It feels like the way Brotherhood should have felt. This conceit of consistently working cooperatively with NPC allies means that there are even fewer instances that require stealth this time around. The game at points tries to nudge you into using it, but it rarely is ever required or the more desirable tool to complete your goal. While one of the big selling points was the return of the ability to blend into the crowd, hacking and slashing your way through enemies is constantly the more satisfying and successful solution. Again, for me, the fact that stealth plays second fiddle to confrontational combat is not only not a problem, but actually an improvement. I understand, though, that fans of the series were hoping to see a return to form for stealth in a big way, and if you are one of those players, Valhalla will probably disappoint. All of the meta systems feel more refined than previous entries too. Instead of receiving tons of marginally better weapons and armor, I'm more frequently finding much improved upgrades, reducing my need to be constantly managing my inventory. Likewise, the skill tree slowly unfurls as you branch out across it, rather than presenting you with the totality of what it has to offer from the jump. It makes the RPG features of the game, which many fans have found themselves turned off by in recent years, far easier to swallow. Another big turnoff for me regarding Origins and Odyssey was the sheer magnitude and endlessness of the game's map and activities. This isn't to say that the world of Valhalla isn't massive or is lacking on quests, but it all feels more manageable, and completing objectives is less like ticking things off on a checklist and more about natural discovery. England, the largest map in the game but not the only one, is a single landmass that can be traversed on foot, on horseback, or boat through its branching rivers that stretch across the entire country. Smack dab in the center is Ravensthorpe, and the game returning Eivor to their home base frequently provides more context for the world that is simply non-existent in the ever-nomadic lives that Bayek and Cassandra/Alexios led in their games. Instead of feeling compelled to grey out every marker on an island, and ultimately failing to do so like I did in Odyssey, Valhalla lets your desire to strengthen the Raven clan be your guide for traversal, and side activities that you do come across feel far more integral because of it. Gone is also the need to rely on your bird partner to scout out an area, tagging every enemy and resource you see before systematically moving from marker to marker. While you do have a Raven as a partner that can scout for you, it's more about receiving an initial lay of the land, rather than intimately acquainting yourself with every nook and cranny. Odin's Sight, a pulsating ability that highlights points of interest in enemies in your immediate vicinity, is far more useful this time around, resulting in you staying more in the immediate action and organically engaging with it. Of course, this is Assassin's Creed, which means that there are also modern-day portions with our contemporary protagonist Layla. The game attempts to make it all feel more relevant by bringing in characters that tied into Desmond's story in the original trilogy and spin-offs, but it once again feels half-baked, both narratively and visually. Like Stealth, the modern-day content is something that the series feels compelled to include, but these games would, I think, be stronger without it, and at this point, I wouldn't even care if they just dropped it entirely. Assassin's Creed Valhalla promised to return to the series' roots after two big steps away from them in Origins and Odyssey, but what it attempts to rekindle ends up holding it back, and what it does best is what makes it decidedly very un-Assassin's Creed. Those willing to embrace Valhalla for what it is will find themselves a compelling and satisfying action RPG.